All right, well, by my clock, it's 7 p.m., so we're going to go ahead and get our community update started this evening. A few words about tonight. I wanted to start with introduction to our panelists. With me tonight, I have Eric Steckling, who is our Director of Communications, Dale Fisher, who's the Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources, Joanna Ford, who's the Assistant Superintendent for Student Services, Scott Schwartz, the Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning, Danielle Arnold, the Assistant Superintendent for Curriculum Instruction, and also Eileen Brett, who is the principal at Wilmot Elementary School, and Megan Russell, who's the principal at Caruso Middle School. And I am John Filippi. I'm the guy that's been sending you a few emails about reopening. And some families I might know from my time on both sides of the district. But a little bit about me. I was a teacher for 6 years, and I work with primarily middle school students, but also K-5. And then I spent 3 years as the assistant principal at Caruso Middle School before I spent another 4 years as the principal of Shepherd Middle School before I took my current role working in the business office at the central office. And I think as I shared in one of my emails to the community with Dr. McConnell transitioning out and us having two co-interim superintendents transitioning in, I was asked to lead this committee looking at opening our schools for the 2020-21 school year. I'm also a dad, so I have a parent perspective on this as well. I'm excited to be with you tonight, and I know our team's excited to be with you. I also wanted to do a few thank yous. We have a really large group of people who are helping with this effort, and this is a really difficult task. It's a really important task. And there's a lot to be sorted through. So I want to thank the teachers, the support staff members, the students, the parents. There are vendors of the district. We've brought in some experts in HVAC, personal protective equipment, custodial. We have local first responders from the Deerfield Police Department and the Deerfield Fire Department. We have a representative from the Lake County Health Department who's assisting us. So I want to thank all of these people for dedicating their time to working on this issue this summer. I also want to thank MC Staley and Amy Karasik, who are working closely with us as representatives from the two associations for our support staff and our Teachers Association. And of course, I want to thank our Board of Education, who's been very supportive of this work that we're doing to get our schools open as we move into August. A little bit about the format tonight. We're in a webinar format for Zoom, which is why you might notice that some features that you're accustomed to in a normal Zoom call might not be there. But the really important feature for tonight is a Q&A feature that will allow you to push questions to us that we will try to address either in real time at the end of our webinar, but it also gives you an opportunity if maybe there's a question that's very unique to you. Some of our panelists and our moderators might be able to answer you directly and privately on a question that's unique to you, or we might just tell you that we'll give you a call tomorrow if it's something that we recognize that's really just unique to you. We're going to go for about an hour tonight, so we expect to wrap up right around 8 p.m. And what we're going to tackle tonight is we're going to start with a little bit of background as to how we find ourselves where we are today. We're going to talk about the reopening committee's purpose and structure. Each of the subcommittee chairs is going to offer an update on the work that each of the subcommittees is doing. And we're going to talk about communication and our efforts for community engagement, both things that we've done previously, but also looking forward to how we're going to continue to keep you in the loop as the school year approaches. And then, as I mentioned, we'll take some questions throughout our presentation, but also at the end this evening. So a little bit of context. It was just 3.5 months ago that we found ourselves closing school. And I'm not sure that any of us could have imagined at that time that we would be closing for the remainder of the 2019-20 school year. Certainly as educators, we've never experienced anything like this, and parents have never experienced a closure like this before. And so we find ourselves here today on June 24th. It was 104 days ago that we closed school. And I certainly thought that we would be resuming instruction and in-person instruction in 2019-20, and obviously that didn't happen. But now we're looking forward, and there's just 56 days until we find ourselves at the first day of school on August 19th later this year. The governor has laid out a path forward in Illinois called Restore Illinois, and it's a 5-phase plan. And we find ourselves today in phase 3, which is the recovery phase. But you're probably aware that we're anticipating we're going to enter phase 4 on Friday. And with phase 4 comes the opportunity for some more things in our state to open up. But also coming with that was some new guidance that we shared with you yesterday, that we just received yesterday from the state, about what reopening school in phase 4 would look like. But certainly, I think it's always important to recognize that this is not a process whereby we tackle one phase and we've climbed that mountain and we move on to the next. We need to realize that we could step back if conditions change. And so as this committee prepares for the start of the 2020-21 school year, we also need to be preparing for what might happen if we're forced into another closure. Who is working on setting conditions for reopening schools? Well, certainly this started with the governor's 5-phase plan, but it's really been the Illinois State Board of Education working collaboratively with the Illinois Department of Public Health to issue guidance and recommendations to schools for what we should put in place to open schools safely. And also, we've been working with our local county health department because we've found in our study of reopening plans that some of the county health departments are asking a little bit different things, not just of schools, but of organizations as well. So we're working closely with them to make sure that they review our plan and they have an opportunity to offer their input on our plan. As I mentioned, ISB and IDPH released guidance, and there's actually been a couple of different parts of guidance. We're on part 3, which we shared with you yesterday, but there was a part 1, which was really guidance focusing on how we would close out schooling that ended in a remote fashion. Then we got part 2 guidance, and part 2 guidance came to us a little late for us to be able to do anything with it for summer school, but it was guidance for phase 3 for summer school programs. And we took a lot of clues from what we were seeing in part 2 guidance. And what we were hearing is that that part 2 guidance was going to be applicable to their part 3 guidance, which they've now released, and we've had an opportunity to review. And so we feel very confident that we have a sense, we had a sense already of what we needed to be planning for. And so we hit the ground running early. And now when we had this opportunity to review the guidance from ISB and IDPH for the fall, it confirmed that we were on the right path. So we feel really good about that, and we feel like we've gotten ahead of this. But some of the highlights and some of the things that the subcommittee chairs will talk a little bit more in depth about. But you know, these are things that we've come to expect when we leave our houses now. Limiting the number of individuals who are in a gathering. In part 3, it's limited to no more than 50 people in one gathering. Screening for COVID-19 symptoms, the wearing of face coverings. In schools, we think about, especially with our early primary grades, reducing shared objects in the classroom. Certainly, we're making plans for frequent sanitation and enhanced cleaning of our facilities. And then obviously the one that we hear a lot about is social distancing and implementing 6-foot social distancing to the greatest extent possible in our schools. Our committee's purpose in coming together was to analyze this guidance that was being released from ISB and IDPH and develop a document that details our local plans for Deerfield 109 that's responsive to that guidance. And that's really what we are striving to produce, is a one-stop shop that all members of our school community can reference to understand how we're opening school, what new requirements are put in place, and what are our plans if we have to close or shut down and because we took a step back. And again, like I've referenced a couple of times already, really planning for all contingencies possible so that we know that we've got a solid plan in place should those conditions shift and force us back into a school closure. Our committee structure, we have 70 people that are involved in this committee. Communications being an important part of this, making sure that we're getting information out to all of you in a timely fashion, in a clear fashion. That's something that we'll strive to continue to do throughout the summer. Dale Fisher has been instrumental in working on some of the legal issues that are associated with reopening schools and some of the policy issues, but he's also working closely doing employee relations. But really the heart of the work is happening across these 7 subcommittees. So we have an e-learning subcommittee, an in-person learning subcommittee, a social emotional well-being subcommittee, physical health and safety, a committee looking at extracurriculars, one that's focused on building custodial and any infrastructure changes that need to be made, and then certainly transportation, getting our kids to and from school. And again, I cannot thank enough all of the folks that are listed here that have been instrumental in us getting this far in our planning and that are going to help us to take it across the finish line. So looking specifically at these subcommittee areas, we wanted to run through and talk a little bit about some of the highlights of what each of these subcommittees are planning thus far. And I'll start with building infrastructure and custodial. Greg Heimbaugh, our Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations, is chairing this group, but he couldn't be with us tonight. But really, this group starts with the procurement of personal protective equipment. And I've given Greg a lot of kudos for his foresight before the pandemic hit, in that he had planned and procured a lot of personal protective equipment before there was a rush on it. And we ended up donating a lot of that to healthcare workers who needed that desperately. But we've been planning now for the last several months, procuring the PPE that we need for a return to school. And what's most important to families is that we've secured the cloth face coverings, the washable cloth face coverings for all of our staff and students. We've also secured the clear face shields. And I experience this every day. My kids have now gone back to daycare. And so I see their staff wearing these every day. We've even got some face coverings that have a clear cutout so that our students can see our staff members' mouths while they're talking. We've implemented enhanced cleaning of our facilities. One of the things that we did last year is we were able to source the Clorox 360 electrostatic fogging machines that allow us to sanitize areas of our facility on a regular basis, secure some handheld units as well, so that we can fog areas of our facilities and even the insides of our school buses at the recommended intervals to make sure that we are keeping those areas sanitized. And then certainly something that I'm sure that you've heard if you're following the news on this is really being considerate of airflow in our schools and our facilities. So we're working with our HVAC consultant to identify if there are greater filtering options available to us. Also, if there are opportunities for us to be bringing additional fresh air into our facilities. And then if we can compartmentalize some of our classrooms so that we're not, blowing return air from one room and one to another. Greg is also heading up our transportation subcommittee. And this is one where we're looking at, Eric, did you have something?
Yeah, if I can jump in real quick. We did have a question from the crowd that you may be able to answer. Somebody is asking, will kids be able to bring their own masks or will only school provided masks be allowed?
You know, that's not something that we've finalized thus far, but I'm not sure that I see a reason why we would prevent a student from bringing their own mask if it's something they're most comfortable in. But that's something that surely we'll address in our final document. We felt like it was important that we had all of the face coverings available if somebody didn't have their own. But certainly, I think there shouldn't be any issue with someone wanting to bring their own as well. Regarding transportation, implementing seating charts on our buses to promote social distancing to the greatest extent possible. You're going to hear us use that phrase to the greatest extent possible because it's something that's repeated frequently in the ISB and IDPH guidance. ISB and IDPH are recognizing that it's not always practical to assume that we can achieve 6-foot social distancing. If you wanted to do 6-foot social distancing, it would limit the number of occupants on a school bus to 7, which there are not enough buses in the state of Illinois or bus drivers to be able to accomplish transportation in that fashion. I mentioned how we're disinfecting our buses regularly, but for those families that purchase transportation from us, I think it's important that we are not confident we're going to be able to offer transportation for purchase in the fall because of limitations in the number of students that we can put on the bus. Though certainly we will update that as we get closer to the school year, and if we're able to do it, we're going to continue to offer transportation for purchase just like we have in past years. I'm going to turn it over to Joanna, who's going to talk about physical health and safety. Joanna's muted. Eric, can you unmute her?
All right, thank you. I could type my whole presentation, but I don't know how you all would feel about that. Good evening, everybody. It's great to see so many people participating tonight. I am very grateful to the members of my subcommittee working on physical health and safety. We have many important tasks that we are in the midst of discussing and working on. And many of them, we obviously do not have definitive answers or specific guidance for you tonight, but I wanted to let you know exactly what we're working on. We are well in the midst of coming up with a few potential options and plans that we'll be moving forward with recommendations on shortly. And we are excited to read the guidance this week, and then we'll be moving forward very quickly. So the main focus of the Physical Health and Safety Committee is to be able to have clear communication to all of our stakeholders about reinforcing safety precautions and proactive measures that we'll be taking in all of our buildings and across the district. One of the main things that we want to reassure you of is we'll be clearly communicating the symptoms that obviously we are screening for, that we'll be hoping our families will be screening for at home, and that we won't be allowing anyone in our building if they're presenting with any of those symptoms. We also will be conducting temperature checks upon entry for our students at all of our buildings. That ties a little bit into the arrival and dismissal procedures, because we're currently working on obviously exactly what that will look like logistics wise. Many of you with elementary students are used to kids, you drop your kids off, they take the bus and they go out to the playground. Certainly that is not what this will look like in the fall. So we are currently coming up with detailed plans, working with building administrators to figure out the logistics of exactly where every student will go in order upon arrival to have that temperature screening conducted. Well in advance of that, all families will be made aware, and they'll be very clear of what those symptoms that we are screening and looking for are, in addition obviously to the temperature check upon arrival. We also are working very closely and meeting again with the Lake County Health Department early next week to come up with more definitive guidance in addition to what we have already from Ms. about preparing for the response of when a student or staff member becomes sick, meaning what type of notification will be shared with families, what exactly will that quarantine period look like. Those we absolutely will be sharing, that definitive guidance, but we want to make sure, as John shared, that we are partnering very closely with the Lake County Health Department on that, in addition to, working with the guidance that we have from ISB. So certainly there was some information spelled out in the guidance that we have, but we feel it's very, very important to work hand in hand with the Lake County Health Department on that guidance, so that we can share with families what that process would look like, what that expectation would be if we have a staff member, a student who has presenting with symptoms of COVID-19 or has a positive test result. John touched a little bit on hand hygiene and face coverings. This is an important component, obviously, of the Physical Health and Safety Committee. In terms of hand hygiene, we'll be working to set specific times and parameters around actual hand washing. That has to be done very strategically because, again, we'll move into hallways and passing periods. We certainly will be adhering to safe social distancing when we're moving our children throughout the building. But there's times where we know that we want to designate for actual washing of hands as opposed to using approved hand sanitizer in our buildings. So we'll be sharing all of that with you. Face coverings, John shared. We will be including this in our final product, but as of now, all signs point to that children would be able to bring, their own face covering from home, but we will also be providing the face coverings if they are needed. And this can look different. We'll spell out kind of what the expectations are, but we know that for certain students, a face shield might be more appropriate. And we will be working, with students and families on that. The question has also come up already about any students who potentially may have a medical need. And again, we'll be working on individual cases and families in regards to face coverings if there's a specific need. Hallways and lockers is also included in our subcommittee. We will be designating how we move kids throughout the building so that we're not moving any students in large groups where they are not appropriately socially distanced. And lockers, we are not going to be using lockers traditionally. We are going to be working with our building administrators and our teachers in terms of what students will be needing in terms of materials and throughout the day, obviously to minimize any necessity for lockers, but we are realistic that there are things that kids need to bring from home and that they wouldn't necessarily be carrying those items with them throughout the entire day. So if children need to use a cubby, a locker, a storage space, we would have very set procedures of how they would be going one by one to that locker, that storage space, etc. Lunchrooms and playgrounds, that's obviously a area of interest for all of us. Lunchrooms, there are a few different options that our committee is exploring. One is obviously lunch in the classrooms. We are looking closely at that option, taking into consideration any implications in terms of food allergies and what that would look like in terms of cleaning all of our classrooms right after kids would be eating in them. That includes any snacks that would also be eaten in the classrooms. We are also exploring lunch outside, fingers crossed for nice weather at the start of the school year, in an appropriately socially distanced manner, as well as keeping students all of these options with their classroom cluster or cluster of peers that they're with throughout the majority of the day, in a large open space available in our building. All of these options that we are currently looking at and will be moving forward with a recommendation, again, would be adhering to appropriate social distancing. Playgrounds, if you've read the new guidance, moving into phase 4, there is an option to utilize our playgrounds. Certainly, that's something we can discuss, but, it's not something that we would necessarily be moving forward with as a district, but we are keeping in mind, obviously, the need for students to get some fresh air during the day, have a motor break, and we will be taking that into consideration as well. And most importantly, with any and all of these items is making sure that we have appropriate training and education for all of the stakeholders, including our families, our children, and staff members. So making sure everybody is well versed in the expectations, they know what we're expecting of them, and they're comfortable with all of the safety measures that we have in place.
All right, Joanna, a few questions for you from the group here. Have clear masks been considered at all for it might fit some students better?
Yeah, so we have the option of some face shields, and we've also already ordered and are looking into some masks that have the clear openings.
Okay. Many questions about how can kids, especially little kids, possibly keep masks on all day? How are we enforcing that? What's the expectation with that? If you'd like to talk about the planning behind that.
Yeah, that seems to be the main question circulating all over the state and nationwide. So we are going to be having these discussions not only as a committee, subcommittee, but committee at large. The guidance as written from ISB, certainly is recommending face coverings throughout the day, but we will be in communication as we're continuing with these discussions. And certainly that's, obviously on my list to discuss with the Lake County Health Department as well.
Sure. And then a few different questions about if one child becomes symptomatic, will the entire class be quarantined? I know you're still working through those things, but kind of where's that stand right now?
Yeah, so we also absolutely, with the Lake County Health Department, we are going to make sure we have systems in place, for kind of school district contact tracing essentially, as well as working with the Lake County Health Department and, determining what our methods of notifying families would be, and then what the proper process and procedure would be based on the students who've been in close contact with that student who is suspected or has a confirmed case. And then you would know well in advance of us opening what that process would look like in terms of an expected quarantine period for those students who'd been in contact.
Okay. And
I think it's also important to add, though, Joanna, that we've talked about this internally, is that if we do have a confirmed positive case of COVID, it doesn't necessarily mean that the entire school is shutting down. There are protocols in place where we would, anybody who had close contact, and the ISB and the IDPH guidance has defined what close contact would look like. But certainly we're going to confirm, as Joanna indicated, with the Lake County Health Department with their preferences as well. But I just wanted to reiterate that it doesn't necessarily mean that our schools would close if there was one confirmed COVID positive case.
Yeah, thank you. Right now they're defining close contact as anyone who's within 6 feet of that person for 15 minutes or longer.
2 more quick ones for you. Are the symptom screening only going to happen before they enter the school building, or is there consideration before they actually get on the school bus?
Yeah, so we are going to screen on site when they arrive. That's, as of now, that's what we're thinking, but certainly this will be determined with our, final recommendation. But we absolutely, a big part of this is collaboration with families and communication, where we will be sharing all of this information about the symptoms that we're screening for. And, we are all working through this process together, so we would want to make sure that everybody's well aware of those symptoms that, we are currently screening for, and we're doing this as a collaborative process, but that would be happening on site.
Okay, and then last one for now. Some school districts are using the model where the teachers move instead of the students. What's our current thinking on that?
So that actually is not something that's being handled by my committee currently, so I'm going to follow up on that question.
We'll touch on that one, and if we don't answer it, we'll pester Scott to answer that when we get done with this one. And now it's Scott's turn. Scott.
All right, thank you. Yeah, it won't let us unmute ourselves on our own. So thank you, Eric. So I would also like to start by thanking my subcommittee. It's really incredible how nuanced and complex some of these discussions become as you really dig in and you start to think about all the different factors and of course keeping safety and security at the forefront. So our committee is responsible for brainstorming and discussing many of the logistics around what a return to in-person learning will look like. Our subcommittee has found it most valuable to have conversations in light of what elementaries would need, separate from what middle schools would need, because there are differences. We have students that change classes more frequently at the middle school level, et cetera. So regarding health and safety protocols with regard to social distancing, as John said in his introduction, we're going to be adhering to social distancing guidelines to the greatest extent possible. We're looking at having markings on the floor, similar to what you might see at a Costco or in a department store. That will be a nice visual for our students and help them remain 6 feet apart as they navigate the hallways, for example. We're also working with our architecture firm who has a very good understanding of the dimensions and the square footage of our instructional spaces, and also our buildings and grounds departments to determine the best ways for us to adhere to these guidelines. The Illinois Department of Public Health has also provided pretty clear guidance for what they're terming as infection control. In other words, how can we mitigate the spread of the virus in the various spaces that we have throughout our building. So to start in classrooms, same rule applies. We're going to establish social distancing guidelines to the greatest extent possible. The guidelines also recommend and encourage that students are facing the same direction and that there's assigned seats. This would probably limit the amount of movement taking place, unnecessary movement taking place in the classroom. Also, if possible, the recommendation is that there's open windows to increase airflow. And then within the instructional block to allow time for hand hygiene, which is something that Joanna had mentioned previously. With regarding the sharing of objects, it's actually fairly simple. Sharing of objects is, for the most part, prohibited. If absolutely necessary, there'd be a requirement that materials or objects would be disinfected between usage. Because of the fact that we're a one-to-one school district and every one of our students either has an iPad or a Chromebook, I believe we're going to be able to accommodate this recommendation fairly easily. We do have to give some greater consideration to our youngest students, those that are in preschool, maybe kindergarten. It's fairly simple. We won't be sharing objects. If there's an opportunity for us, for example, to use a digital math manipulative rather than a handheld math manipulative, we will do that. With regard to infection control in our restrooms, it is being recommended that we schedule bathroom breaks throughout our day so that classrooms can go down together, practicing social distancing, and then the teacher or a staff member can monitor the number of students that are in a bathroom at any given time. We understand that this could, similar to sharing objects, this could be harder for some of our younger students, and so we're working through different options as far as allowing students to use the bathroom when they need, but prioritizing again and limiting the number of students that might be in a bathroom at any given time. And we're looking at some physical barriers between sinks, between urinals, things like that. With regard to the PE, the gym and locker rooms. So one of the things that we know for a fact is it's going to be so critical that we provide our students the opportunity to get some physical activity. At the same time, the guidance is pretty clear, is that especially in the beginning of the year, we are going to go outside as frequently as possible. There is going to be no sharing of objects. So our PE teachers have already been working, going back to the spring, on their scope and sequence about what units they could implement in the beginning of the year that doesn't allow, certainly for physical contact, but also for the, it doesn't allow for sharing of, let's say, basketballs. Lastly, for our middle school students, the recommendation is that the locker rooms are not used. And so what this means is that our students will not be changing for gym. They could change into their gym shoes, of course, but they would remain in their street clothes. And the purpose there is to avoid a situation where they're in tight quarters. Auditoriums and multi-purpose rooms are going to eventually provide some nice flexibility for us. The recommendation around the larger spaces in our buildings, including auditoriums, multi-purpose rooms, but also libraries, lunchrooms, etc., is that those spaces should be used for instruction if possible. So if there is an opportunity for us to utilize some of these spaces, obviously we can't have more than 50 people in these spaces at any given time, but it's a space, or it's spaces in our buildings that we will be able to utilize as we see fit. And the last piece is really about how we are also determined and making considerations to meet the needs of all students. We know that we have students that many have some needs, and there could be unique needs, and it's important that we have conversations not only in this committee but across committees so that we're considerate of all needs that would be needed.
Eric, any questions for Scott?
Yeah, Scott, there's been a few people that are asking about, will there be either more hand washing opportunities during the day or greater numbers of stations or facilities where kids can wash their hands?
So yes, what we're looking at, I can focus on the middle school for a second, and I can also touch on the last question that was asked to Joanna, because that is under my purview. Our middle school students rotate classes, and so we have to think about what that will look like. One of the possibilities and one of the schedules that we currently have in draft form is to provide more time for transitions because we know that we're going to have to maintain social distancing. We're going to have students changing classes very systematically. And so it could be one option during those times to have an opportunity to wash hands. And I did mention also about the idea that there would have to be time dedicated for hand hygiene in the instructional block.
You touched on this a little bit, but some classrooms have tables, some have desks. How do you handle the difference, and what attention is being paid to each room?
So this is where our work with buildings and grounds and our architect firm is going to come in handy. We would like to figure out how to maximize the space and use the space that we have to place kids and socially distanced kids, as we've said before, to the best extent possible. Our desks are obviously a little bit simpler to separate out and provide a learning space for our students. The tables do provide a little bit of a challenge because we would have to, because typically four students sit at one table, and that might not be possible. And so, we've also had conversations about maybe removing a table or two to provide more open space. There are options out there, and we're working through exactly what that'll look like.
Okay. And this is for you, but really for anybody else. At the present time, there is no consideration of school hours, schedule, days of the week, hybrid schedule, anything like that being changed.
Yeah, I'll tag on to that question, Eric. Our intention is to open school on August 19th to in-person instruction and maintain the same hours that we've maintained previously, and to have our students in our facilities Monday through Friday. What we found in our research looking at districts that are considering, a hybrid model, as has been talked about, which can be conceptualized in a number of ways. But generally speaking, schools that are looking at doing such a model serve students in grades 9-12, or they're much larger systems than we are. So we feel confident that we can meet the guidelines that have been put forward to us, but still keep our normal school hours and keep kids in our buildings Monday through Friday.
If I may, I'd like to touch on the last question you asked, because that is something that my subcommittee has been tasked with, and that is middle school students or elementary students changing classrooms. The guidance recommends having students remain in one room and having the teachers rotate instead. We will be able to accomplish that and accommodate that recommendation very simply at the elementary level. Obviously, students have one teacher for the majority of their day. The times when they are in the hallways in a typical, under typical circumstances, is to move to and from their specials classes. It is likely that our specials teachers will go to the classroom instead. The exception would be PE. At our middle school level, it becomes much more complex, because while you might think it's easy to keep kids in one classroom and have teachers rotate, we do have students that are in different math levels. We have students taking one of 4 different world languages. We have students that are currently scheduled into one of 4 different specials classes, art, music, STEM, CMA. So it does, like I said, get complex rather quickly. The critical piece will be when we have to make a transition for one of these reasons, that we're going to do so carefully and strategically, with probably staff helping out and monitoring hallways. And also between classes, we will have some disinfecting taking place. When the new group of students come in, they'll have clean surfaces.
Eileen, SEL.
Good evening, everybody. I too want to thank the subcommittee that I'm working with, and I'm very happy that the social emotional well-being subcommittee has representation from all 6 of our schools. So we have representation from both elementary and middle, as we know the needs emotionally of our students may be very different for a kindergartner, say, than that of an 8th grader. Our committee has been working under the guidelines and framework of CASTLE. CASTLE is one of the leading organizations in developing platforms and programs for developing social emotional learning in schools. It is the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. We've looked at their documents and have used their recommended goals or intended outcomes, which include taking time to build partnerships and relationships, to deepen our understanding and our own plans for social emotional learning, to design opportunities for adults to connect and heal, and to cultivate the social emotional learning competencies of our adults, which includes both teaching staff and parents, to create emotionally safe and supportive learning environments for our students, to make sure that whatever type of environment we're in, whether we're in person or we're in a remote situation, that we have ongoing dedicated time and instruction for social emotional learning, which is what we have in our typical situation. Every teacher is implementing the Leader in Me program, as well as other strategies for social emotional learning. And definitely looking at data. We need to use data to deepen those relationships, to understand the needs of our children and of our adults. The committee we met earlier this week, and we discussed using surveys to survey our parent community, our teaching staff, and our students, and to make sure that we have a committee that follows up in each building on what are the social emotional needs of our building, of our grades, and of individual students. Also important here is to make sure that children and adults have access to our clinical teams, and that's what they do during the school year. So we are looking into small breakout groups to develop recommendations in each of these different areas. Some of the ideas of the committee that the committee is very invested in is making sure that adults connect to children before we open our doors, whether that's through a Zoom call, through letters, through if we're able to meet in person. We know that our typical large group walkthroughs of 500 kids walking through our schools won't be able to happen, but we want to replicate that in other ways, just like we'll replicate our kindergarten orientations in other ways as well. We want to make sure that whatever type of environment that we're in, the students are having opportunities to connect not only with the small group within their classroom, but to the broader group, including other children in their grades, or for example, at the elementary schools, many of our younger grades are buddied with an older grade. And while we may not come together in one room, we can certainly use Zoom, even if we're in the same building, to do activities and games to foster the social emotional learning. I think the most important idea behind this committee is that in order for children to be successful with their learning, they need to feel emotionally safe and secure. And we also want to make sure that we are providing support to our parent community using our clinical staff, as there's going to be individual questions or global questions about how to talk to children about COVID, or even the preparation for wearing masks in school. We think the semantics and how we speak to our students is going to be very, very important, focusing on the things that we are doing and not the things that they can no longer do.
All right, thanks, Eileen. We do have a question. Will there be any additional social workers or counselors that the district is using to help fulfill some of these social emotional needs?
I don't know that we're necessarily going to have additional counselors, but we are looking into what outside resources might be available to us, either as schools, as a district, or individual learners as well. And also one piece that I didn't mention was providing ongoing staff development to all of our staff, our teachers, our all of our non-certified staff, so that we are able to support the students. Students look to the adults who they know and trust within their school setting, within their homes. We want to make sure those adults are well equipped to support the emotional needs of our children.
Okay, that's it for now.
Thank you.
Ooh. Uh-oh, I can't change my slide.
I can go again.
There we go. Megan, extracurriculars.
All right, good evening, everyone. I hope your summer is off to a great start. Thanks to everyone for joining us. Our committee was tasked with the focus on our before and after school activities and the extracurriculars. This also includes our co-curricular instrumental music classroom. So that would be both the learning component built within the schedules that take place at our middle schools, and the extracurricular aspect of that as well, which is our performances. Our committee, which absolutely a shout out to them. Thanks for all of their support and ideas that they bring each week and their patience as we go through all of this and the changes that may come and the guidance we receive almost by day as we keep looking through it. But one thing that we know and value is the importance of these activities that they have on our students, because this is the time to support them socially and emotionally. And we need that always, but even more now. And I know that piggybacks off of Dr. Brett's committee as well. And we all know that that threads through everything that we are doing. So focus is on our students, and at the core of each of the recommendations that we are putting together, we also are following the guidance by ISB, the Department of Health, IESA, and IHSA. And that will continue to come out in these next coming days as we continue to receive some updated guidance. We have a variety of people on our committee, and I think this is wonderful because it brings in multiple viewpoints. So just like every other subcommittee, we do have parent and student representation. I think it's important to note that we do have elementary and middle school representatives. So we have the whole exhaustive list that we can create. On that, along with it, is our athletic directors at our middle schools. We have a park district representative, coaches, club sponsors, and more importantly, in order to touch on the co-curricular aspects of our instrumental music, our K-8 music department chair is also on our subcommittee. So shout out to you guys again. Thank you for everything. The focus of our first committee meeting was really to establish our goals as a subcommittee and create a timeline in which we wanted to accomplish those goals. We began by creating just an exhaustive list of each and every activity and extracurricular that we could think of. This was done in two groups. We broke out into two breakout sessions. So we had our elementary focus and our middle. And we just were seeking input outside of our committee as well to make sure that that list that we did put together in that first meeting was true and valid. In our meeting this week, we have met twice now. In our meeting this week, we did review the list that was created in our first meeting, just to ensure that we did have everything listed after talking to some outside sources beyond our subcommittee. And we began to work on streamlining our focus and our recommendations to help with communication and for when we do return, what that could look like and some parameters people can follow as we hope to engage in some of these activities. We did this by placing all of the extracurricular activities in the most appropriate, what we could call focus area. So some of those might be our before and after school care, athletics, PTO events, park district sponsored events, clubs, and so on. So we created those focus areas, and in each of those, we began to brainstorm and record recommendations of at least one, maybe up to 3 strategies of how we can execute these activities, of course, following the parameters of, with the hopes of the anticipation of phase 4 on Friday, of the 50 or fewer total participants, and that would include our coaches, directors, sponsors, and spectators, knowing and understanding the safety guidelines with the PPE being required and 6-foot social distancing being required. So our strategies fell within those parameters that we are starting to recommend for each of those focus areas. I think as a committee, we are focused of, discussing recommendations that would allow for some creative plans to go into place, maybe alternate plans, movement of when these activities could take place, something that is usually housed in the spring. Maybe it's better suited in this new environment coming to the fall, or vice versa, fall to spring. Knowing in our minds our traditional approach and understanding of what we are used to may not fit or look the same in this new environment that we might be entering into. But we are remaining flexible and being creative in our efforts because we do know the importance of these extracurricular and activities for our students. Just to inform everyone as we move forward and continue our work and our efforts, we plan to continue to brainstorm those strategies and add to the notes document that we have, that we are on all week long outside of our hour-long meetings on Mondays, using the guidance, of course, that's provided to us and using that as our guidelines. We're also considering the impact of what our plan is to open and how that affects our extracurriculars and our before and after school activities. and also the consideration of the potential if distance or digital learning, if a second wave occurs, how that would affect what our subcommittee's work and recommendations are. And main focus of ours in our final 2 meetings will be the impact of all of the parameters that we have been discussing on our music-related courses, providing recommendations within the considerations.
All right, thanks, Megan. You touched on this briefly, but there was a question about could some of these clubs or activities be held virtually like this via Zoom? Is that something being considered?
Absolutely, absolutely a great option. We don't, of course, want to do that for all, but that is a possibility and something that we would probably strongly encourage for many. It's a wonderful way to continue to be able to offer these opportunities for our students outside of the school day. So that is absolutely an option.
Okay. This is kind of your committee, kind of somewhere else, but our space is going to be cleaned between the regular class day ending and then when extracurricular activities start.
Absolutely. Yes, and I know maybe that falls into other subcommittees as well, and you know, talking about that, but that's one of our top priorities, and that is something that will be done.
Okay. And then, you know, my wife's a music teacher, so I get this question all the time too, but band concerts, choir concerts, all these things, these big gatherings, as of right now, unable to really happen, right?
I think we can get creative with this. I don't know if everyone on here knows, but my husband is a fine arts director at a high school. It's in our family, and I talk about it all the time with him and have been using him as a wonderful resource as well. But I think also having Mr. Grossberg on our committee, and we are discussing these, what could this potentially look like? Some of our larger gatherings of our festivals with our elementary and middle together. Is there a virtual component with a live component? Different things that we can do. But of course, we do have to fall underneath the parameters that are given to us of the 50 or fewer, remaining the 6 feet apart. But these are discussions that we are currently having, and we are not just taking it and saying these things will not happen. We are getting creative with this. And of course, our top priority is keeping everyone involved safe, but still allowing and having these opportunities for our students.
All right. Thanks, Megan.
Thank you.
Danielle.
All right, good evening, everyone. I too would like to publicly thank the committee. We've had a couple of meetings thus far, and I can tell you that there is a ton of really tough discussions that we're also having. People are looking very thoughtfully about what e-learning looked like this spring, and also talking about what we would want it to look like if we return to an e-learning environment in the fall. I guess I would also like to take this opportunity to really publicly thank like our staff, our teachers, our instructional coaches, our curriculum specialists, our teaching assistants, I mean, everybody top to bottom for what they did this spring. Because we went into an e-learning environment in a very, very short time period, and they picked it up, I think, pretty quickly. And while we all recognize it was imperfect, we're also proud of the work that was accomplished during that time. With that said, we have been talking a lot about what it would look like and how it would look differently if we were to return to an e-learning environment this fall. We have the good opportunity to review all of the feedback that we received this spring. At the end of the school year, we administered a stakeholder survey and had 648 responses to that. Those responses came from parents, students, and staff, and we're trying to analyze all of those pretty closely. And sometimes the experience varies based on the home circumstance, where one person maybe was really satisfied, another person wanted a little more, while another person wanted a little less. And so our conversations have really been about what's going to be in the best interest of our kids if we return to this environment. In the spring, the Illinois State Board of Education had set some expectations about what e-learning or remote learning would look like, and those expectations were kind of limited, if we were honest. They asked us to not be specific in our grading, which is why we had a pass-fail grade card. We had limited time structures because some districts, quite frankly, weren't able to pick up as quickly as we were, etc. I think in the new guidance guidance, we're seeing some return to normalcy. Even if we go to an e-learning environment, the expectation is that some of those things that are in place in a traditional school would also be available to kids if they were learning virtually. So those are the priorities we're trying to put into play, and we're having really specific conversations about that because we want the e-learning experience to be more robust for kids. So when we start talking about like the different e-learning scenarios, when we left school in May, we were actually planning for an all-in model. We didn't know what to expect in August. And so our staff was already beginning to prepare for the start of the school year in an all-in model. And recently, obviously, we learned that now the defaults will be an in-person model, and hopefully we're able to maintain that. So now we're talking more about what intermittent e-learning might look like. So if there were a temporary school closure or even a more extended school closure, how would we go back into that sort of environment? And then the final that's listed there is a hybrid, which would be maybe some sort of blend, possibly for students who were immunocompromised. The Board of Education had a little bit of a conversation about that opportunity on Monday evening at the board meeting. When we're talking about schedules, we're really looking to closely mirror the schedule to the school day for the ease of transition. But we also are talking about that balance of synchronous and asynchronous instruction. And what that means is synchronous is the Zoom sessions that kids participate in. Asynchronous is when we're pushing out assignments or we're pushing out videos for kids to look at and preview on their own time and do their own learning and then revisit that so that they have a firmer understanding. And that's where it gets a little complicated because our primary kids, for example, so that's our kindergarten through second graders, like they are still developing independence in their learning. And so we understand that they required some structured support. They sometimes have difficulty with whole class Zooms. When 25 little ones are on a Zoom together, that can be pretty interesting. And so our teachers are talking about what small group instruction looks like if we're in an e-learning environment for that age level. Our intermediate grades, so grades 3 through 5, do a little better navigating their digital tools. They know what the school day looks like. And so for them, they can manage some of that whole group instruction a little bit better in short spurts. We don't like a ton of screen time. All day screen time for any kid isn't good, but they handle it a little bit better. And then our middle school kids are our most independent learners, and they have the easiest time managing the virtual environment. We did have teams and teachers working collaboratively even throughout the spring to balance the time. So that kids were getting some full class periods on Zoom, but not all class periods on Zoom every single day. So we don't have any answers to what that will look like yet in terms of minimums and maximums, but I do want you to be assured that we're having those conversations together and working to do what's in the best interest of everyone involved. In terms of grading and feedback and attendance, those also go along with some of the lifts from Illinois State Board of Education. We had pretty structured guidance around those in the spring, and we're anticipating this fall that would be, we would resume normal taking of attendance, normal feedback, normal grading. That's an important part of a child's growth. Oftentimes in the elementary schools that occurs during those small group times or individual conferences. And with our intermediate and middle school kids, that is through grades. And so we are looking to resume grading and reporting and feedback and taking attendance in the mornings.
All right, Danielle, we've had people have come and gone at various points of this. So if you just want to kind of reiterate, you are preparing for basically all scenarios, whether it's a full remote learning possibility. You know, a lot of people are saying, what if a kid gets sick? What if a parent gets sick? What if a kid has to be pulled out of school? All of that is being talked about and considered right now.
Yeah, and that's where we turned a little bit to the Board of Education for guidance just on Monday evening. So we haven't had time to really tackle this. We were also waiting for Illinois State Board of Ed guidance on that topic. So we're planning to look at that. But we do understand that we have kids, as I said before, that are immunocompromised, and that we're looking, you know, that it's a priority of this school district to provide them with a continued learning opportunity.
Okay, that's it for now.
So timeline, we set what we believe is a fairly aggressive timeline, given the fact that we didn't get the official guidance from the state until yesterday. But we are projecting that we will have our completed plan in one document for prepared for our public on the 20th of July. And we're going to take some time between the 20th of July and our board meeting on Monday, July 27th, to have folks who are involved with this committee work really take an extensive look. We've been very purposeful. There's so much ground to cover. We've been very purposeful about kind of siloing some of the work as best we can in each of the subcommittees, but there is natural crossover. And so as we finish our work, there's a good opportunity for us, anybody who's involved, to take a good look at it before we finalize it. Our anticipated date of release for this plan is July 31st to our parent community. And what that would look like is we would publish our full document detailing how we've been responsive to all the guidelines from ISB and IDPH. And one of the guidelines that came from ISB was that all families should complete an intake questionnaire to talk about how their child is doing. Are there any new changes in terms of their academic needs? Are there any changes in terms of social emotional needs? Or are there any changes in the family in terms of health needs? As Danielle alluded to, our board discussed this on Monday night. Now, we've made very clear that our intention is to open school on August 19th, but we also recognize that there are unique circumstances for families. In any other given year, we open school on the 19th and everybody comes to school. But our board has affirmed that they want to work with families if someone can't return to an in-person instructional setting and provide a remote option to those families. What that will look like may look different for each family depending on their need. And that's something that we haven't been able to define yet, but it's something that we're working on very closely. Additional communication from this group to all of you. We've shared that we've established a dedicated landing page on our website. It's a place that we continue to update. It houses minutes and agendas from the various meetings of our subcommittees. This meeting that we're running tonight is being recorded for those that didn't have an opportunity to participate in it, and we will post it there so that folks will have an opportunity to see it. We've established a dedicated email address, reopening@dps109.org, for folks that want to share information that we can then share with the committees as they do their work. We're here in a community Zoom right now on June 24th, but we're planning to have an additional Zoom update to the community in late July when the plan is finalized so that we can present the final plan, but also answer questions at that time. And certainly any other pertinent information that comes across the wire for us, we'll continue to share out via email and social media channels. I also wanted to share that one of the things that we're going to do with the questions that we are receiving tonight is compile a FAQ. I know that Eric has been texting me throughout this meeting and sharing some updates on questions. He's been sharing me that there's some questions that have been kind of repeats and a lot of tackling similar issues. But we're going to take a look at all of these questions and make sure that we compile an FAQ that we can post on the website as well, because hopefully that's helpful to all of you. We are at 8 o'clock, but I think we're going to go a little bit longer. So if you want to step off the call now, that's fine. But I think we're going to take some time to answer some of the additional questions we haven't had a chance to tackle. Eric, you want to start sending some questions our way?
Yeah, definitely. And if all the subcommittee chairs want to unmute and decide who takes what. There were a few questions about, will there be some sort of requirement that a student or staff member has a negative COVID test required of them before they start the school year?
Yeah, I'll take that question. And then Joanna, feel free to share anything that you've learned in your subcommittee work, but a COVID test is not something that's has been discussed in the guidelines from the Illinois Department of Public Health.
Okay. If teachers get sick, what's the protocol with that? What happens?
Joanna?
Dale, did you want to say something?
I can take that one.
Okay.
As far as the teacher being sick, we would follow the same protocols that we would have in place for any absence. But obviously, in light of the COVID situation, that would certainly come into play of determining if it's COVID related. Due to the declaration of a pandemic that would require different disclosure, I would work closely with Joanna on what the quarantine procedure would look like in regard to that. We would have to examine the guidance from the IDPH as well as ISB on how to quarantine the students and staff in that situation. We would obviously have to look at, is the test going to impede the ability for remote learning from the teacher? Do we need to get a guest teacher on site? So all those have to be dealt with on an individualized basis, while still taking into account the confidentiality of an employee's health and medical information to the furthest extent possible. Joanna, do you have anything else you would add?
No, I think that covered it. Thank you.
Seeing this question a lot as of right now, is there an estimate on class sizes? Will there be full class sizes? Are we reducing the number of students? I know the language says social distancing to the best extent possible. What's the thought behind that?
Scott, do you want to chime in on that?
Did he mute?
Scott muted.
He muted himself again. Here he comes.
Yeah, I did mute myself and I unmute myself. So we're rather fortunate. Our class sizes typically are on the lower end, let's say around an average of 20. And our classrooms are averaging a decent square footage. Right now, the plan would be for our full class of students to be in the classrooms. But what has been mentioned earlier about the potential for certain students, let's say, for example, who are immunocompromised, they would possibly be taking advantage of a remote option. That will reduce the number of students in a classroom and allow for greater social distancing. There are also, I briefly mentioned this earlier, there are other larger spaces in our facilities that could be utilized to allow us to space out and adhere to social distancing guidelines.
Okay, a number of people asking, what does before and after school care look like right now? Are there plans for that?
Yeah, so Megan has included the Park District in her committee, but the Park District is going to be permitted to run before and after school care.
Okay. Have a question about, will there be a separate area in the nurse's office for children that might have your run-of-the-mill injuries versus potential COVID cases? How's that separation being handled?
That's a great question. So it's a priority for us that our building nurses are able to continue with their day-to-day responsibilities and care. So we will be setting up a separate safe space or a quarantine space, as you may, for any child or staff member who throughout the day presents with any symptoms of a concerning nature related to COVID-19. That would be a separate area from our current nurse's office in the building.
Okay. Any ideas? You had talked about the setup of lunch, how it might look. Is the plan still to serve hot lunch at some of the schools, or is that possibly being changed?
So we haven't gotten that far yet. You know, our first step is to, once we got this guidance and see what our parameters were for lunch, to be able to then work with our building administrators to finalize where lunch will be occurring, and then go the next step to find out, you know, what we would be doing in terms of lunch. We absolutely will continue to provide lunch for any families who are in need, and find out what that would look like, and share details. But we will be, you know, as soon as we know in terms of lunch availability, share that information widely.
Okay. I think this one is for Eileen. Will students have a chance to debrief about their COVID experiences and kind of talk?
I think, you know, our committee talked about if students need to talk about it, that we would prefer that to be done in small group or individually, because some students don't want to talk about it. So we want to respect the needs of every child, probably handling that need on more of a case by case, but also looking at having our clinicians possibly run some parent groups through Zoom, where they may be able to provide resources and language for parents to help prepare their own children in the same language that they would then use with kids in the school setting. We're not going to stop students from asking us questions, but the environment or how we answer that, we will really vary based on each individual child.
Okay. Then this goes back to kind of in classroom stuff, sharing of materials. Dr. Philippi, you had mentioned, we're a one-to-one device community, but there's a lot of common materials, books and pencils and other things that kids share. What's being done to make sure that, not too much contact is being had with those?
Scott, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, it would be for the most part prohibited. We would try to make any tool that is typically shared, we would try to make that digital. My wife is a teacher, and she and I were talking about this just the other day. She would probably make, reading material that might have otherwise been read, with a shared, piece of paper. She'll make it available on the devices. Library books, there is guidance for library books, and disinfecting and things like that. And so we'd be taking those precautions, and we would be making sure that disinfecting is taking place if something does have to be shared.
And I would just also add that, I think one of the simple solutions is that we purchase some more of these materials that students are typically sharing. And that's something that I've talked with Scott about with his committee, is identifying some of these items that are commonly shared. One that comes to mind is in our art classrooms, right? Some of the things that students have generally share, we might need to increase our inventory. So we're looking at that as well.
We'll have a lot of new students going to new buildings for the first time, whether it's kindergartners coming in or whether it's sixth graders moving to a new school. How do we make sure that they feel welcome, that they're getting familiar with their new school, where there be opportunities for walkthroughs or any of sort of introductory things?
I'm going to answer this question in that I don't know that we have a firm plan in place, but my initial read of the Part 3 guidance was that they were discouraging some of those in-person options. So I will speak from my experience as a middle school administrator in our community for a number of years, in that one of the most anticipated events for our fifth graders moving to sixth grade was the opportunity to visit the school in the spring, where they heard from their building administrators to talk about what the middle school experience was like. And then certainly everybody looked forward to what we always kind of called our locker day, where kids got an opportunity to pick up some of their supplies, to set up their locker, walk their schedule, walk the building. Right now, the guidance is suggesting that that might look like something that would be virtual, though I think we need to take a look and see if we can't somehow offer kids an opportunity to move through the facility, albeit it might not be in one day, right, where we have the large masses of students in the school.
John, I can also speak that we already did a lot of that in the spring for incoming kindergartners and the 5th to 6th transition. So the middle school principals met through Zoom with fifth graders, and the elementary principals hosted Zoom meetings with incoming kindergarten parents. The SEL committee talked about new families also who are registering now, or students who might be transferring within the district, about plans for teachers and administrators to put in place, and even working with our PTOs to perhaps connect new families to existing families so parents have someone to rely on as well.
Eric is sharing with me that we've kind of addressed the big ticket broad questions that are coming in. We're going to take one more question, but I just did want to reiterate that we do intend to go through every question that we've received tonight and put together an FAQ that we'll push out to all of you. And if there's something that was a question that was asked that was of an individual nature, certainly we're going to reach out to you as well to answer that question. So Eric, do you want to give us our one last question for the evening?
Definitely, and over 210 questions, so there's a list here. Any thoughts to using alternative local buildings for classrooms? Any sort of non-DPS 109 facilities if that space is needed?
Yeah, we're not looking at that right now. I'm not sure that there would be facilities that would be meet our needs. But again, with the guidance that's been released, we know that we're able to meet the guidance that's been released in our own 6 facilities. So I just wanted to thank everybody for joining us this evening. It's great that we had so many people join us to get an update on what this committee is doing. It's even better for us that we've heard from all of you with lots of questions that we know that we can go back and provide answers to if we haven't already clearly answered them for you, so that we can continue to keep you up to date and satisfy your curiosity and your interest in every aspect of the planning that's going into opening our schools for 2020-21. So thank you for joining us. Again, we're going to put that FAQ up shortly, and we'll also post this if someone that you know didn't have an opportunity to attend this evening. Thanks, and good night, everybody.